Welcome everyone to IsisParenting's Breastfeeding Chat and Learn. I didn't do a sound check before, so hopefully you're hearing me now. Can somebody type in and let me know if microphone's sounding good? Great, thank you, Kara. Okay, I think we're going to get started. Welcome everyone. Today in our moderation chit-chat room, we've got Katie. Katie, thanks so much for stepping in today and being our mom support person in the chit-chat room. And let's see, today we're going to talk about the secrets of breast milk storage and all of the so-called rules and myths that are out there in terms of what you can and cannot do in terms of your breast milk. Again, many of you have been in the webinars before. If not, welcome. Glad to have you today. We do this every Thursday at 12 noon here at IsisParenting. I'm sitting outside Boston, Massachusetts, where we have 4 parenting centers and a large online presence, and we do all sorts of breastfeeding support, prenatal education, early parenting support, toddler programs, and then of course all of the education, retail product, and online shopping to support those ventures. So my background is as a mother-baby nurse educator, board-certified lactation consultant, board-certified in pediatric nursing, maternal child health. I've been working with expecting and new families in the Boston area for the past 22 years. I live outside Boston. I have 2 teenagers and a rescued Bichon who comes into play a little bit later in this presentation today. Please do put your questions in the Q&A box, and also there's general conversation in the chit-chat room that Katie and other moms can answer for you. So today, as I said, we're going to talk about storage of breast milk and some shortcuts and tricks of the trade. And the reality is that there's just not a lot of research-based evidence about the handling of regular breast milk expressed by moms at work, at home, and fed to their full-term healthy babies. Most of the research that's available is there's only a few studies. Typically, they were done in the very early 80s to the early 90s, and we make a lot of assumptions from them, and those same studies are used over and over again to validate loosely recommendations that are used everywhere. And when you really try to track down the science behind some of these recommendations, they simply don't exist. And so you will find that depending on the sources that you check, the recommendations vary greatly depending on a refrigerator magnet may say 3 or 5 days of storage of milk in the refrigerator. Other sources might say up to 8 days. Really, the length of time that you can store your milk and the quality of the milk itself is going to depend on many different factors, including the cleanliness and the amount of bacteria present at the time that the milk is expressed, and then the temperature the milk is kept at, and then individual factors that mothers really have minimal control over, like lipase. Lipase is a digestive enzyme present in your milk, and lipase breaks down the fats of milk. Any word that ends in ASE means an enzyme, and LIP, is the Latin root for lipids and fat. And so lipase in breast milk is actually a good thing. It's what makes breast milk so easy to digest, and it actually goes to work in the baby's gut and helps the breast milk be digestible. But the problem is some women that have high volume of lipase in their breast milk sometimes find that their breast milk seems to spoil faster or takes on a foul odor faster, and that's because the milk actually begins to break down the fats. It actually starts digesting itself during storage. And even though you may put freshly expressed breast milk in the freezer will slow down the action of lipase, but it doesn't eliminate it completely. So there are a very small number of very unfortunate moms who put beautifully freshly expressed breast milk in their freezer and then take it out 2 weeks or 2 months later, thaw it, and realize that it smells very, very bad, and sometimes the babies refuse it. That milk actually is safe to drink, but again, some babies are discerning and will not drink it. By the way, milk that does have high lipase and has that odor can be donated to a human milk bank if you qualify as a donor. The fact that the milk has high lipase activity is not an issue for the donor milk. Let's see. My suggestions that I'm going to share with you today are based on the current research that is available, studies that I have heard at conferences, papers and research studies that are not published but are underway, and then, of course, quite a bit of daily experience working directly with expressing and pumping and nursing women. I've been working in the field of mom support and lactation for 22 years. I've been a board-certified lactation consultant for 15 years, and I have taught probably 6,000 women through the Pump Talk classes. And in fact, I'm teaching Pump Talk tomorrow in Arlington. If you're a local to Boston mom, I will be in Arlington from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock tomorrow at ISIS Arlington, and I think there might still be space in that class. But I do teach that class once a week, rotating throughout our ISIS centers, and there is a version of that class online. If you are not local to the Boston area, I can pull the link and give that to you. It's an abbreviated version. It's nowhere near as complete, and it's certainly not interactive like the live class. But if you live in Seattle, then taking the Pump Talk Light class may be good for you. And then finally today, I really want to stress the importance between pumping milk for your healthy baby in the community setting, like at home or at work, and storing that milk and feeding it to your baby, versus if you are pumping for an ill, immunocompromised, premature baby, bringing that milk into the hospital and so on. There are very special hygiene protocols that have to be followed, not only for the health of the baby who's receiving the milk, but cannot provide supporting evidence for many of these recommendations. Neither is there evidence to the contrary. There's just not good evidence, period. So myth number one, mothers need to sterilize all of their pump parts every time they pump. Everything needs to be clean, clean, clean. Well, I am a fan of clean, but first of all, boiling your pump parts, in my opinion, is one of the worst ways to clean them, because if you boil your pump parts regularly on a daily basis, I guarantee that 20 times it might go okay, and the 21st time you'll forget that you've got the pot on the stove, and then 45 minutes later you'll either hear a rattling noise that is curious, or you'll start smelling melted plastic, one or the other. And so there are many better ways to thoroughly clean your pump parts than boiling them on the stove. But I will point out that it's really not necessary to sterilize your pump parts on a regular basis, any more than it's necessary to sterilize your coffee mugs, your dinner plates, your teaspoons, and your forks. So imagine that you lived in a house with no dishwasher. Hand washing your forks and your plates with hot soapy water and letting them air dry is absolutely sufficient, and is also sufficient for your pump parts. So regular cleaning with soap and water, and I recommend using a bottle brush that's special for your pump parts and your baby's toys, pacifiers, bottle parts, and so on. And notice that it does have a nipple attachment on the other end, so you've got the big bushy end that fits into the bottles, and then you've got the little wiry end on the other side that gets into all the nooks and crannies of the small parts of your pump. Regular dish soap is sufficient, and the reason I chose this bottle, I don't know, I think I'll let people see if they can comment why I chose this particular bottle of Dawn in the chit chat room. I did give you a hint earlier, so if you don't get it, I'll be very insulted. Okay, and so dish soap and a bottle brush and water. You always want to have your hands clean before you sit down to pump, and air drying is sufficient. You can put your pump parts in the dishwasher, but do put them in a dishwasher cage first, because those are small parts and they do fall off and get melted. Katie wants to know, is that Emmett on the label? Excellent, Katie. I'm glad somebody's paying attention. That's not Emmett, but that is a Bichon, and I don't know why they put, maybe they're trying to say that the dish soap is gentle enough to clean a Bichon with. I don't know. Maybe I could save some money and use dish soap instead of the expensive shampoo I buy for Emmett. But yes, I did choose that bottle in particular because of the picture of the Bichon. Thank you. Other ways to clean your pump parts, the microwave steam clean bags by Medela are very handy, and you do still need to use your bottle brush and dish soap though. So that's the friction and surfactant. That's what gets all the little bits of fat off, and that's actually the most critical part of cleaning your pump parts. What you do after that is really up to you. You can put them in the microwave steam clean bags. You can put them in the dishwasher. You can let them air dry on a towel, on a clean dish towel, a paper towel, a bottle brush, a bottle drying rack, your dish rack, whatever you want to do. But you can't skip the soap and water part and the bottle brush part. Do clean your tubing once a week unless you have a closed system breast pump. Most of the breast pumps on the market are not closed system, and so if you notice condensation or droplets of moisture in your tubing, then you want to let the air chuck through the tubing to dry it, and then anytime that you see milk backing up into the tubing, you need to stop the pump right away and clean the tubing. But just on a general good care basis, it's a good idea to clean your tubing once a week. There are certain pumps where you should not clean the tubing and get the tubing wet on the inside. For example, like the Medela Freestyle pump, you don't want moisture inside the tubing, and that's a closed system pump. So read your owner's manual, but things like the Pump and Style, which is the most popular pump, and the Hygieia pump is a closed system pump, but you can get milk backing up into the tube. So pay attention to your tubing so you don't have anything yucky growing in there. But in real life, there does need to be shortcuts and streamlining of the process, and here's some ways you can do it. So in the workplace, if you've got a private spot to pump but no soap and water, it's not a big deal. You have your hand sanitizer in your pumping bag, and one of my favorite tips to save time for new moms is the refrigeration and reusing of pump parts. So in between your pumping sessions, put your pump parts in a Ziploc bag, and then it can either go in a regular refrigerator or it can go in a cooler bag. And in your cooler bag, a very easy way of keeping everything cold is to use 2 or 3 separate 1-liter water bottles that you fill most of the way up and then freeze solid overnight. And that will become your cold source. Plus, as those begin to thaw, you can be drinking that ice water. Then when you get home, you'll wash everything well the way we just discussed. So you can refrigerate and reuse, refrigerate and reuse, refrigerate and reuse, go home and wash well. If you're at home and you're trying to pump after breastfeeding, either to slowly collect small volumes of milk throughout the day or as a tool to increase your milk production, you can in fact just unplug the tubing and stand the bottles and flanges upright in the refrigerator. Use coffee mugs like you see here so they don't fall over and spill. And then you can take them out again 2 or 3 hours later and pump directly back into them. Just hook the tubing back up, and after you finish breastfeeding, pump a second time and a third time into the same collection sets. And then when you're finished for the day, wash well. So everything should be thoroughly washed at least once every 24 hours, but an accepted shortcut is to refrigerate and reuse. So you heard me say that you could be pumping after breastfeeding once, twice, 3 times, and mixing that milk. So a lot of people will ask, well, wait a minute, you're saying that I can take warm milk and pour it on top of cold milk? I heard you couldn't do that. I heard you should keep milk separate. There's a lot of crazy rules out there that just really don't seem to make a lot of sense. There's not a lot of research to back up any of these common recommendations. So you can mix morning and afternoon milk, your left breast and your right breast, and of course fresh and frozen. So you can take milk out of the freezer and thaw it, and then you can portion it. Say you have 3 ounces of frozen milk and your baby likes a 4-ounce bottle, so you can add an ounce of freshly expressed milk to it. Maybe you thawed a bag of 5 ounces of breast milk and your baby takes 3-ounce bottles, so you can make 1 3-ounce bottle and a 2-ounce bottle and then add freshly expressed, or add a little bit more of a different frozen milk bag to make the right amount. So you can combine your milk. Here's another very common myth. Once the bottle has touched their lips, it must be consumed in 1 hour or else tossed. And this is very sad because when people begin to introduce bottles to young babies, they don't always have a great idea as to how much milk the baby will want. And it's also hard sometimes to predict when a baby is going to want to eat. So sometimes a baby will be fussy and a bottle is warmed up, offered to the baby, who takes a little bit but then very promptly falls asleep and leaves most of the bottle unfinished. And then the caregiver or the parent is torn because they've read that they should discard that milk. And again, I don't have there's really very little research to back up any recommendations here. So we're going to fall back on common sense and on the fact that breast milk has, especially if it's freshly expressed breast milk, has live antibodies in it, white blood cells, phagocytes that go seek and destroy bacteria. And we also know that that very, very commonly people will continue to use that bottle at the beginning of the next feeding within a small number of hours with no negative effects whatsoever. So once the bottle has touched their lips, once the bottle has been warmed, if it's been in and out of the baby's mouth, it really does become a ticking clock. However, it doesn't need to be automatically discarded. You can use it again within several hours at the beginning of the next feeding. Now, this is helpful if your baby is being cared for at home by a grandparent or an in-home caregiver. Once you start moving into regulated childcare environments, these policies are set by the Department of Public Health. So here in Massachusetts, for example, it is a Department of Public Health child care facility licensed policy that any milk, whether it's breast milk or formula, that's been offered to the baby must be consumed or discarded after an hour. So many daycare facilities do have what's called a breast milk waiver that you can sign, and although they will not feed the milk to the baby after that period of time, they will save the milk in the refrigerator for you and you can bring it home. So you could use it in cereal that night or something like that. So you want to inquire and you want to work with your caregiver to determine what are the policies that they use in their center and how can you work around it. It's also a very good reminder that you want to keep your bottles on the smaller side, not the larger side, because you really want to avoid as much as possible having milk left over. You want to make the bottles roughly the size the baby typically finishes, and not a lot more than that. Okay, again, another common myth are these very, very hard and fast rules for the storage. And I've heard all kinds of things, the rule of 4, the rules of 5, meaning like 5 hours at room temperature, 5 days in the fridge, 5 months in the freezer. So people spout these rules, but again, you know, that there's not a lot of evidence that really backs them up. And I'm going to fall back on my golden rule. I'm going to skip over to that. And the golden rule that I must say 3 times daily is, if it looks okay, smells okay, and your baby will drink it, the milk is fine. Never throw away breast milk without a darn good reason. We have all experienced the disgusting scenario of pouring clumpy, curdled milk in our cornflakes or putting rancid half and half in our coffee. You will not mistake perfectly fine breast milk for nasty, sour, curdled, spoiled breast milk any more than your baby would willingly drink it. So it looks different, it smells yucky, and it tastes disgusting, and you will know the difference, and so will your baby. So breast milk, as many of you know, if you started pumping already, breast milk separates, and that's normal, and it should gently swirl back together as soon as you hold it under hot running water for 20 seconds or roll it between the warmth of your palms for half a minute and gently swirl the milk back together, and it will then blend back together. It won't remain separated or curdled or clumpy. It should have a regular smell to it and not smell sour or curdled and not smell very rancid, like some people describe milk that's been impacted by lipase as having the smell of vomit to it. It's normal sometimes for breast milk to smell a little bit soapy, a little bit metallic, especially if it's been frozen, or a little bit like stale ice cream, kind of cardboard, freezer-burned ice cream. Those are normal smells, and usually babies are not troubled by that. So again, if it looks okay, smells okay, and your baby takes it, it's fine. And I'll go back to the slide to reinforce, because that caveat applies to each one of these things. Now, using breast milk at room temperature, if you're going to express milk and you know that your partner is going to feed it a little bit later, so maybe you pump in the evening and your partner is going to do the first feeding with your baby, it's okay to leave that at room temperature. But in general, I would recommend putting milk in the refrigerator when you're done pumping it, so that you don't ever have to worry that it's been sitting out for a long period of time. And whenever you're putting milk in the refrigerator or the freezer, it should be going all the way in the back with something in front of it, not on the door and not lined up on the shelf pretty so that you can open the freezer door and gaze lovingly at your little bags and count how many ounces. You want it all the way in the back with something in front of it. That's the coldest spot, and that protects it from temperature fluctuations. Up to 24 hours in a regular cooler with ice packs, and as long as the ice packs stay frozen, it's perfectly fine to keep it in there longer. How long in the fridge really depends on the individual person and how well her milk tends to store. So some people will know that usually on the 6th, 7th, or 8th day, the milk is not smelling as good. Other people can find milk that's been in the fridge for 10 days and it seems perfectly fine and the baby happily takes it. So again, keep these numbers in mind with the golden rule. Generally, up to 6 months or longer in a regular refrigerator freezer and 12 months or longer in a deep freeze. Okay, here's another myth that we hear all the time, and I get lots of panicked emails and tweets in the winter when there's big snowstorms and people lose power. And I think even in October this year, there was a big windy rainstorm and a lot of people were out of power. And my best answer to you is if your power has been out for 24 hours, first of all, as soon as your power goes out, put a strip of duct tape across the freezer. Do not the power come back on and let everything refreeze in there. If you do not open the freezer, things in the freezer are going to stay essentially frozen. If there's stuff in there that is not as important as breast milk, like chicken breasts that you're worried about, toss those, but don't toss the breast milk. And here I'm very excited to say that there is some good research that shows that they've done some bacterial testing of breast milk that's been thawed and then refrozen and found that that breast milk seems to be quite robust and can be used as long as it was stored under clean conditions. So again, everybody constantly says when breast milk is thawed, it must be used within 24 hours, never refreeze breast milk, and so on. I'm not advocating that you routinely refreeze your breast milk. On the other hand, if you've lost power or if breast milk partially thaws during shipping or travel, don't hesitate to put it back in the freezer. Mark the bag special so that that's milk that you'll pay careful attention to when you thaw it, but chances are that milk is going to be completely fine. Okay, here's another common myth. Breast milk storage concerns about losing benefits, losing value. So here's some of the common comments that I hear frequently. Oh, I'm worried because I read that the antibodies stick to the storage containers. I'm using glass. I don't like using glass because it's heavy and they cost more and they take up more room in my freezer, but I need to use glass bottles because I read that the antibodies stick to the plastic or stick to the milk storage bags more. Other people will say that they read that that breast milk contains live white blood cells, but when you freeze the breast milk, those cells don't survive. And then, of course, many people are aware that breast milk components actually change over time to meet the baby's needs. So, for example, the milk from a mom produces for a premature baby has different constituents, different levels of fats and proteins and so on over milk that a mom produces for a 3-month-old baby, and then the milk that you make at 10 months is different than the milk you make at 3 months, and so on. And so from that, sometimes people extrapolate that the milk that's been in the freezer for 2 or 3 months is no longer as appropriate for the baby because it doesn't quite meet the baby's needs anymore. And then, of course, there's this desire to discount the benefit or the value of breast milk because now a baby is, you name it, weeks or months old. So let's take a look at this, shall we? The other thing I just want to remind people by putting in these photos is that if you are back to work, and let's face it, 80% of moms are back to work during the baby's first year, the ability of you to express milk at work is what allows you to continue this beautiful breastfeeding relationship when you're not at work. So that's a completely separate benefit of expressing and storing the milk. But let's just be realistic here and talk about all of the wonderful things that your breast milk has, and in the order of preference. So freshly expressed in terms of the value and the bioavailability of antibodies and immune properties. Of course, fresh from the tap is the #1 choice of babies everywhere. And in terms of live antibody action and so on, direct from the tap, no middleman. You cut out the middleman, and that's the best way when possible. But of course, for a million different reasons, that's not always possible. And the next best is freshly expressed breast milk. And within the first 24 hours, expressed breast milk is quite similar to breast milk from the tap in terms of live cell action and so on. And even at 48 hours, the breast milk still has quite good bioavailability, low bacterial counts, and so on. Milk that's been stored for 3, 5, 7 days in the refrigerator, slowly you do begin to see some of the white blood cells die off a little bit, but that does not diminish any other benefits of the breast milk, and there are so many. So things like particular types of fats in the breast milk, the long chain LC PUFAs, they're called, long chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, things that contain DHA and ARA that help the baby's neurologic system, their brains, their eyes. There's lactoferrin in breast milk, which is a wonderful anti-infective property. It helps prevent GI, gastrointestinal infections. 7 days, or in the freezer for 5 or 7 days. Sure, there's fewer live white blood cells, but there's still so many other amazing things in the breast milk that makes it so valuable. Okay, so fresh from the tap, freshly expressed that's been hanging out for a week, and then comes frozen milk, and then, believe it or not, comes donated or banked human milk, and then finally, last on the list is formula. So when we go back to this list here and talk about, well, gosh, there's fewer antibodies because they stick to the sides of the storage containers. Yes, so breast milk from the breast has 100% of the live activity of antibodies. So then, maybe you move to breast milk in a bottle, so maybe you've lost, I don't know, I'm making up a number here, completely making this up, maybe you've lost 10% of the antibody activity. Then it's been hanging out in the refrigerator for 5 days, so maybe you lose another 10%. So even if your breast milk is down to having 60 or 70% of the live white blood cells that it had originally, that's still 100,000 more cells per mouthful than formula will ever have. Okay. Here's a little bonus information I put up here. You heard it here first, folks. So some emerging research, and this is when I wear my other hat in the sleep medicine arena, and some of you know that I oversee our sleep program here, and we also have a sleep webinar that's similar to the breastfeeding webinar. Some emerging research that we know about melatonin is that, first of all, misconception about melatonin. Melatonin is not like a sleeping pill. Taking melatonin does not help you fall asleep. What melatonin does is it helps regulate your sleep-wake cycles. It helps regulate your circadian rhythm. This lady getting out of bed says, I think this is funny on so many different levels, I slept like a baby. I dreamt I took melatonin. So does that mean she was up every 90 minutes to 2.5 hours all night long and did a lot of grunting and thrashing around at 3 o'clock in the morning? But melatonin does not help you fall asleep, but it does help regulate mammalian circadian rhythms. And this is well documented in the research. Breast milk contains melatonin similar in levels to the mother's melatonin, and in animal models such as in little lab rats, the mother's circadian rhythm helps set the pups, the little baby rat circadian rhythm through breast milk, through melatonin in breast milk. So what does this mean for humans? Again, there's no research that I'm aware of that's yet being done on this, but it's certainly true in other mammal studies that is documented. Your breast milk contains melatonin. Melatonin helps reset circadian rhythms, and in other species, it helps entrain the offspring to the parent's circadian rhythm. So what this means is it may behoove you to mark your milk with AM and PM. And when possible, don't get obsessive over this, but if you're defrosting bottles of milk from the refrigerator, from the freezer, it's just another thing that you can think about. Give AM milk in the AM and give PM milk in the PM when possible. Please don't stress over this. But it is something to think about. Adding to that, wearing my sleep hat again, I can teach a lot about sleep hygiene. And as we know, it's hard enough to sleep because babies don't sleep so well at night. But once your baby falls back asleep, the worst thing is when you lie in bed and can't fall back asleep yourself. Now let's just talk a little bit about caffeine. My recommendation is that if you desire caffeine products, that's completely fine. You can drink several cups of coffee. You can have your caffeinated sodas, but please finish that up by 12 noon because caffeine has a fairly long half-life, and it would be nice for it to be out of your system at the time that you're going to sleep and staying asleep. And caffeine, similar to alcohol, may not prevent you from falling asleep, but it may prevent you from falling back to sleep in the middle of the night. So another thing to think about, another reason to mark your milk AM or PM is if you do drink caffeine in the morning, then focus on giving AM milk in the AM. Only small amounts of caffeine pass through in the breast milk, but if you've just had 2 Starbucks, why would you want to give, and then expressed milk, why would you want to give that milk as the bedtime bottle if you had another bag of milk that you could give instead? So just another little thing to think about. And remember, you heard it here first when it comes to the melatonin in breast milk. And then my last tip for you is a storage tip, and I highly recommend that you store your milk in the milk storage bags laid flat to freeze like a plank, because look at how nicely and neatly they stack up. And look at the mess on the bottom counter. It's a beautiful mess of baggies, but when you store your bags in cylinder shapes like that, it's really hard to get a tidy package together, and it ends up taking up a lot more space in your freezer because they're not packed as densely. So look at the nice, once they're frozen solid, you can stack them up like nice little planks. And then, of course, the labels up at the top is where the date and volume is. So you want to have date, AM or PM, and the volume on your milk. And I think that was all the slides I had. So did I debunk some myths, and did I share some secrets? Tell me what myths and what secrets you learned today. You can put that in the chat room. I'll take a couple of questions and then we'll wrap up. Here's a question from a mom who has a 7-week-old. My son has been thrashing at the breast for a few weeks. Maybe during 1 or 2 feedings a day, he'll nurse for 10 minutes and then pull away, whip his head around, back and forth, and then scream. I tried burping him, and whether or not a burp comes up, well, this is called gastrocolic reflex, and it's not colic and it's not reflux. Gastrocolic reflex, I've done a webinar on this. Watch the Poop Talk webinar. It's my favorite webinar. And what it talks about is, and this is so common of babies in your age group, this is the entire GI tract getting excited and woken up as the baby starts to drink. Good old peristalsis, once you start swallowing milk, the peristalsis, the waves of contractions of the muscles, the smooth muscles, propels the milk down the esophagus into the stomach. The stomach receives the milk and gets excited and begins to contract and pushes the milk through the pyloric valve and into the intestine, and then inch by inch by inch, all 15 feet of your baby's intestine gets excited, and until finally the baby passes gas or has a bowel movement. But it is the sensation of motility in the gut that creates the baby squirming and discomfort. Some babies will clamp down and stay on the breast and just buck around and pull mom like crazy. Other babies will turn beet red and scream. They're on, they're off, they're on, they're off. And it is experiencing that sensation of gastric motility. It's like a cramp. And when we as adults have those sensations. We know, oh, hopefully I'll get a break shortly and I'll be able to use the bathroom because I want to have a BM. Or, oh, I'm having a little stomach, I'm having a little cramping going on here. But of course, babies just live in the moment and they're, overcome with sensation, and it's an uncomfortable sensation, and it's also a sensation they're not accustomed to. In utero, they practice sucking, they practice peeing, and they had a lot of different sensations that they were aware of. They had some vision, although, not much to see in there, just a little light or dark. And they certainly had good hearing in utero, although everything was underwater. But one thing they did not practice at all in utero was having a bowel movement. So you know that babies are born with a meconium plug, and their first bowel movement, we hope, happens shortly after they have been born. They begin drinking colostrum, which has a laxative effect, and then finally they pass that meconium, which has plugged up their GI tract. And so bowel movements are new sensations to babies during the first several weeks, and that's why they're so dramatic about their GI tract. But watch the Poop Talk webinar. It will talk more about that. Also, I have a Storify on gastrocolic reflex that, hold on, let me find it. I've got my email right up so I can grab that for you. I'll put the link in. Actually, what I'll do right now is I'm just going to post the entire, my whole Storify section right there. So there's other topics like another good one that you might like, Kate, is how to take a bath with your baby. And there's a good one about life with a newborn, 3 to 8 weeks, the hardest weeks of all. But what I'm looking at is this one right here, which I am seeing and you are not, but I'm copying and pasting that link. It's hard being a one-woman show here, I'm telling you. Even though I've got Katie, she's like my silent partner. Okay, so there's the gastrocolic reflex. Why is my new baby fussy when eating? Okay, next question. When is the best time to pump, and how do I start building up my supply so my husband can start with the feedings? I'd like to get more than one start a day so he does feed. Okay, so here's my recommendation, and I don't know if you're local. If you're local, please come to Pump Talk. I'm teaching that tomorrow in Arlington, and I'm teaching that next week somewhere else. I can't remember where, maybe at IsisParenting. I've had multiple webinars on this topic, but basically my best advice is double pump, hands-free, hands-on, after breastfeeding, 2 or 3 times a day, directly after breastfeeding. Do that for a week, and gradually you'll be finding that by the end of the day you will have 3 or 4 or more ounces collected without taking away any milk from the baby. The pumping 2 or 3 or 4 times after breastfeeding does not have to happen indefinitely. That's a short-term technique to both collect additional milk and begin to boost your milk production a little bit, because once you want an extra, say, 4 or 6 ounces of milk in a 24-hour period and your baby is just 1 to 2 months old, that really is 15 or 20% more milk than your body is currently attuned to make for your baby. So really what we need to start doing is triggering an increase in production so that you can remove additional milk and freeze it for longer term storage without taking away from the baby's current needs. I can post specific webinar dates on that one, but the Medela, the webinar I did for Medela, Bright Horizons, returning to work as a breastfeeding mom, making it work as a breastfeeding mom, or whatever that's called. All of these are listed on the same page that you click through to get here today. So the main breastfeeding webinar page, if you scroll down, you'll see a long list of all of the webinar recordings and topics. You can watch those on demand for free. Another question, do older babies over 6 months still need to eat every 3 hours? Sometimes at daycare, my son sleeps through his expected mealtime, and I'm not sure what to advise them about timing and bottles. I would say it depends on how your baby is sleeping at night. As long as your baby is doing pretty well at night, I wouldn't focus on trying to cram extra bottles in or telling them to wake him up to feed him. It's not essential that your baby eat on an every 3 hour schedule at all. If you're home with your baby, they may nurse far more frequently and also far more irregularly. So they may nurse 2 or 3 times over the course of an hour or two and then take a longer nap. In a daycare environment, typically babies get more onto a routine, it's possible that he's taking larger bottle feedings a little bit less often in the daycare setting. So I wouldn't worry that he's going too long between feedings as long as overall he's getting adequate milk at daycare and he's not starting to wake up more at night for milk. Typically in that age group, frequent nighttime wakings for nursing are much more about sleep association than they are about metabolic hunger, although the metabolic pattern can be reinforced, and so gradually babies can then start taking, only 50% of their calories from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., which means they need the remainder of their calories 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And as your baby gets 5, 6, 7, 8 months old, you probably want to begin trying to reverse that trend as much as possible, so that your baby is perhaps doing one nighttime feeding at 3 or 4 a.m. But is getting much of their nutrition during more sane hours for you. Okay, final question because we need to wrap up. I have a 5-week-old baby, have been using a nipple shield because I have a heavy letdown. My daughter would take up to an hour to latch. We would spend hours eating. Let's see if I can see the rest of that question. Hours eating. There we go. Sorry, having trouble with the question thing. Nipple shield, hours eating, fussing, crying. Now it's a breeze. I am concerned because I can't seem to wean her off it. Any tips on this or any concerns with long-term use other than the annoying part for me? Okay, so nipple shields, the good, the bad, the ugly. The good is that it can be, when used appropriately, an effective tool to allow breastfeeding in a scenario where breastfeeding was not otherwise happening. The bad, because sometimes they're used for not the greatest reasons and with no supervision and with no instruction as to where to go. So a lot of, where to go from there. A lot of moms are discharged from the hospital with a nipple shield and no follow-up support. And then the ugly, just because it is a little bit of a pain in the butt for moms, they get lost in the bed sheets. You always got to know where it is, and it's an extra piece. And so for some moms, it really bothers them. And for other moms, they're like, hey, this is how we nurse. It's, I've tried to get rid of it, or I haven't tried to get rid of it. It's not a big deal. I'll tell you, part of the bad rap that nipple shields have has to do with the history of nipple shields and the fact that they used to be much thicker plastic or rubber and had decreased sensation to the breast and the nipple, and did have a nasty habit of decreasing milk production when used without insurance pumping and so on. That's not quite the case anymore because the shields are generally better, thinner, and we don't see quite as much issue with milk production, although I do generally recommend insurance pumping a couple of times a day after breastfeeding when someone is using a shield. In terms of trying to move away from the shield, I really do think it's worth periodically working on it, but I don't think it's worth stressing over. It would be nice if sometime over the coming days, weeks, or month you can get rid of the shield because, again, it's just one less piece of apparatus to have to deal with when breastfeeding. And it's nice to have the baby directly on the breast. On the other hand, if it is the thing that allows you to successfully breastfeed, if it doesn't bother you and your baby is thriving, then don't let anybody concern you about longer-term use of a nipple shield. And of course, in our breastfeeding support groups, on one-on-one lactation consults here at ISIS, or somebody local to you if you're not in Massachusetts, you can find a lot more personalized support as to where to go. How do you gently wean from the shield? But usually, what people do is they start. And if the baby needs the shield placed back on, then you put the shield back on. But sometimes it just it's intermittent, and then gradually they wean away from the shield, and sometimes it just seems like it clicks. moving away from the shield didn't work for several weeks when you tried every few days, and then all of a sudden the baby seemed to grow or was stronger or could handle your flow better or whatever the reason, and then you were able to move away from the shield. So congratulations, just getting breastfeeding up and running and having breastfeeding challenges and persevering with a 5-week-old who's beautifully breastfeeding and breastfeeding happily and easily now because you're using a shield is, in my opinion, a good use of a breastfeeding support product. Okay, I think it's time to wrap up. Please remember to come back next week, put it on your calendar, and help us spread the word. We always like to have at least a dozen moms in the chat room. Makes us feel validated. Thank you, Katie, for your help. Please follow us on Twitter. Here's my Twitter handle and IsisParenting. Please sign up for our week-by-week newsletter that ties in with the exact age and stage of your pregnancy or your baby's birthday. And then, of course, if sleep is something that interests you, join me on Tuesday at 12 noon for the Infant Toddler Sleep Webinar, which is interactive and features our amazing sleep team leader, Megan Casano, who has five long, hard years of working intimately with parents and mothers of infants and toddlers, helping get them into a better sleep pattern in the most nurturing and relaxed way possible. So thanks everyone for coming, and I will see you perhaps next Tuesday and hopefully again next Thursday. Have a wonderful week and happy nurturing.